So I kind of want to gain an understanding of, like, I mean, for some people who don't really know, like, what would you say, what does inclusive talent management mean to you? I want to know your definition of that.
Really great question. So for me, inclusive talent management is about removing the systemic barriers that exist in the talent management process. And by that, I mean making sure that the process that you've got for identifying, selecting, and mobilizing the talent in businesses is done in a fairer and more transparent way. So if I think about the more traditional talent management practices, I mean, a lot of businesses, not all, but certainly my experience in research, a lot of businesses work with a 9-box grid model. And for those less familiar with that, the 9-box grid is where leaders in an organization will categorize people into one of 9 boxes based on an index of either their performance or their potential. So they will say, you know, in this instance, Rachel is either high, medium, or low performance, high, medium, or low potential. If you're high potential and high performance, you'd be a box 9. If you are low potential, low performance, you're a box 1. And typically in a lot of these businesses, again, not all, but a lot, box 9s tend to be where all the focus goes. So anybody in that kind of superstar bracket will be the ones that get the energy, the time, the development, and the support. The people in box 1, there's either more difficult conversations had or they're exited. And I felt that system, for a number of reasons, was quite manifestly unfair, because often it was designed and orchestrated around subjective decisions. So it's based on individuals' personal views of people. And we've proved through lots of research and data over the years that even with good intent, people will recruit and select in their own image. So what you end up in these scenarios when you do the wash-ups of these talent reviews in organizations is seeing, you know, more and more of the same types of people getting promoted. And therefore, statistically speaking, that cannot always be on pure talent. It's got to be on face fits rather than a person's actual individual ability, skills, or potential. Yeah. And so inclusive talent management is a mechanism to be able to correct that and identify and select talent more objectively using data and profiling potential in a more objective way to make sure that those promotions, hiring decisions, succession planning are done more fairly and equitably.
Amazing. And how do you go about that? How exactly do you objectively select those talent inclusively?
Yeah, so it kind of meant redesign. It was almost to start from scratch, really, to complete. I remember getting in a room with some experienced people a number of years ago and saying, right, we've got a problem here we need to fix. How do we completely re-engineer this? So let's document out what the problem is. And we listed where the biases were in the process, where the fundamental flaws were. Then we said, okay, if we flip that round, in a utopian world, what would, you know, how would you objectively, to the best of our ability, would you be able to objectively assess somebody's potential? So first it meant codifying what potential was, which no one had ever, certainly in our network, people hadn't done before. They just used the term subjectively, and it varied depending on leader. So we said, okay, if we take leadership as the starting point, what are the characteristics for great leaders? Like, what does great leadership look like? And we profiled 2,000 leaders globally across 60 countries, looking at, and we benchmarked their performance data, their engagement data with their team, things like sickness absence, sales data where we had it, looked at all that stuff in the round. And then we profiled people using psychometric testing to say, are there any common patterns in behavior or correlations around the ones that were performing really well? What characteristics did they have versus the people that poorly performed? And what we found was people with higher competitiveness, particularly in leadership roles, and lower emotional intelligence and lower learning aptitude, performed more poorly versus leaders that were more empathic, that were good at connecting and working with and through people, were more conscientious, had a good learning aptitude and adaptability. So we then codified that by turning that into a psychometric assessment that we were able to then use to say, if you're a leader, what is your level of potential around leadership, particularly? There are other tools that do this for specialisms that are out there on the market. And so rather than reinvent the wheel, we've used those when it comes to identifying a specialist for a role. And then we then combined that data set with people's physical skills. So again, interestingly, if you think about the traditional ways of working in an organization, we recruit somebody into the organization, we put them into a role like marketing manager for argument's sake. we as individuals know their skill set in that current role, but people have had lives, like they've got a rich history of career experiences that are not defined by that one role. So the role before might have been store manager, it could have been architect, it could have been anything, and someone's had a career transition, has all these skills that we just don't know about. So we wanted a mechanism to look at the whole person's back history to say what skills, qualifications, attainments have they got along with this potential. And then we realized that we've got this enormous data set in this spreadsheet and that wasn't manageable. So we set about creating technology using AI and machine learning that would help us manage that data far more smartly, and partnered with a Canadian startup about 6 years ago doing that. And so between us, we co-built a technology platform and used our psychometric tool to then start to more objectively assess whether someone was the right fit for a role versus, again, the traditional practice of just, selecting by personal opinion.
Amazing. That's so interesting. I just want to touch upon, you mentioned about potential. And I'm thinking in terms of people who already have those sort of skills and identifying people who have that potential to fit into a specific, job role. I was just thinking, like, in terms of potential, do you think people can actually learn those skills? Rather than obviously you can identify those skills, but then also having that potential to learn those skills and actually get into the role that's desired. Do you think there's a possibility for that, or is it more like, you either have those skills or you don't?
It's a really, really good question, and there are different schools of thought on this. My own, based on the data and the research I've seen and my own personal experiences, so skills can 100% be developed. You've got to find the right way for people to learn those skills because everyone's different and one size doesn't fit all, but skills are completely attainable. Potential and talent is attainable as well. You can learn a lot of these things. That said, there are some things that individuals are more hardwired to find easier. Like, if you compare Olympic athletes versus, the average person, for example, there are people that are built, it's in their DNA to be able to do things that, some of us could only aspire to do. It is never going to be a natural talent for me to go and run, to be the fastest runner in the world. Does it mean I can't learn how to run and be the best I can be? Absolutely not. I could probably have a really successful career in it, but I'm probably not going to be the world number one. So I do think there's a bit of nuance in that of some people are naturally very talented in something. And so why would you not play them to that strength? Equally, for those of us that really want to work hard and develop into those things, of course it's doable. It's just going to require a bit more time, effort and energy than perhaps somebody who's naturally wired to do that.
Yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. Awesome. So, okay, so we've mentioned about inclusive talent management. So I guess what would be quite interesting is like to get your opinion of what exactly is to be inclusive for like companies who are trying to be inclusive, and most of them are trying to be more inclusive these days, but like I want to kind of know, what does that term mean to you, so like it can just click in a lot of people's heads.
Yeah, so inclusive for me is accessible, is probably the closest word I could find to use to describe inclusive for me. So how do you make the environment a place where people can access it equitably, so that regardless of your background, your characteristics, you're not at a disadvantage in that system. So that's one area for me. The other bit that sits very closely with me around inclusion is that there is psychological safety in an organization. So it's one thing to go and get a diverse group of people and diverse thought into your organization, but if everyone's terrified to speak up and add value, you're never going to get innovation and diversity of thought. So you really need to remove the barriers and then unlock people's potential by enabling them to talk up, to contribute, and that's the art form in leaders.
Amazing. So it's kind of like creating that space, that safe space for people to actually just have a conversation and like be as transparent as possible, because at the end of the day, like these people are coming to work in your team and they're basically setting the way for the future leaders and stuff. So it's kind of basically giving them that platform to be able to speak about, or have a voice rather, use your platform to have a voice. And I think that's incredible if people will start to realize that it's more than just checking the box of like, we are inclusive. It's about also providing that space for employees to actually feel they can talk and that they are listened to. You know, it's one thing to say a point, but then if you're not seeing those actions, you're just like, well, is there a point?
Absolutely. There's a really, really good example of this that I was reminded of recently by a friend. And if you take a company like Volkswagen, in around, and I might get the year wrong on this, but around 2018, if memory serves, they had the massive scandal about emissions, the emissions scandal that kicked off. Now, they are, they're not world leading in their diversity, but they've got a lot of diverse people at all levels in their organization. And you've got some incredibly smart engineers and talented people in that organization. But that scandal still happened because people were terrified to speak up. And there were smart people that engineered systems to conceal the truth around emissions purely because they knew the consequence of speaking up and turning to their bosses or their peers and saying something's not right, we need a different way of doing this, would mean that they would lose their jobs. And there's lots of interviews and case studies around this that have come out since from employees there that shows there was a culture that lacked psychological safety and that people were terrified to speak up. And so that's an example where you can have a diverse workforce and still not have inclusion because people are frightened. But if you flip that around and you create that culture where people can contribute and speak up and challenge things, you're going to get really great innovation and be able to provide a much better service for people than creating a culture of people that just say yes to you all the time.
Yeah, no, that doesn't sound like a good place to work. Just be like, yes, like very robotic in a way. These are people, we're human beings. We have a nature to like want to speak and be heard. So yeah, that makes sense.